Hello everybody, my name is Roshan Kishore and I am the Data and Political Economy Editor at the Hindustan Times. Earlier this week, the Nobel Prize in Economics was awarded to three economists, Professor Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo from MIT and Professor Michael Kremer from Harvard University. The Nobel Committee, while giving this award, said that this award is being given to them for their experimental approach to alleviating global poverty, which has transformed development economics, which is now a flourishing field of research. As luck would have it, Professor Abhijit Banerjee is here in India to talk about his new book, Good Economics for Hard Times, which he has co-authored with Professor Esther Duflo. This is their second book after Poor Economics, and we are here to talk to Professor Abhijit Banerjee about his book, about the kind of economics he does, and probably a couple of more things. Professor Banerjee, first of all, congratulations a lot for the award to you and your co-awardees. Professor Banerjee, you did not begin your academic career in economics with RCTs, which is the experimental approach we're talking about here. Can you tell us in a little bit of detail your experiences and your philosophical transformation over the course of your academic career, which made you make this switch?
So, when I was a graduate student, I actually took a class in development economics, and I thought it was the most boring thing in the world. I mean, I won't name who taught that class, but after about, I think, one or two lectures, I decided.
This was at MIT.
This was at Harvard. I was a student at Harvard, and it was boring as all hell. So I gave up, and I was trained as a economic theorist. I got employed as an economic theorist. I got my job at MIT as an economic theorist. I mean, I was a proper card-carrying economic theorist, and I think at some level, that's still part of my identity. I don't think I've ever completely backed away from it. In a sense, I would say what's nice about experiments is they're much more closely tied to the way theorists think about the world than normal empirical research. Because at some level, you can design your experiment to exactly ask the question you want to ask, which is not true mostly with normal empirical work, which is sort of you compare things that you can compare, but they don't necessarily have much to do with the theory you're trying to test.
For the benefit of our viewers, can you explain, perhaps with an example, how exactly do you use RCTs in your work in fighting poverty and development economics?
So I think the couple of different pieces to that. The idea of an RCT is very simple. It's like a medical trial. In order to know the effect of something, the best way to know it is to not have to worry about whether the people who got that quote-unquote treatment are different in some systematic way from the ones who didn't get it, the control group. And the way you achieve that is by choosing them at random. That way you know they're not systematically different, and then you compare them. So that's the idea, and it's extremely straightforward as a concept. I think the value of that is, first, it gives you relatively hard to argue against evidence on the impact of a program. So when you're doing something controversial, like what is the impact of microcredit? It's very useful to do an RCT, because if you don't do an RCT, somebody's going to come up with the argument, but you compare those people with those people, they're different because they are taller or they are something, Whereas if I do an RCT, it's hard to argue that in this location, I got the answer wrong. I might have got the answer wrong for maybe somewhere else. If I just happen to do it in Spain, it's going to be different. But at least in this location, I think I got the answer right. That's one thing. So it gives you a fairly precise answer. The other one goes back to what I said before. If you want to build a story of what's driving poverty, for example, it's useful to be able to test theories, to be able to start from a set of hypotheses and test them. And what experiments often do is they give you a nice way to set up the entire comparison, so that you can actually say, well, this was my theory, this was my hypothesis, it was wrong or right, as the case may be.
Now that you've received the highest possible recognition in the discipline, how do you see the future for both you, Esther, and Michael Kremer, as well as JPAL, which you run, which basically runs the entire RCTs you're talking about? How would you like to see it evolving in the future?
Hopefully, what it establishes is that we are competent professionals, that we what we do is not silly, and that we have some professionalism to offer. We know how to do a certain kind of implement a certain kind of method, and as a result, hopefully it'll open more doors. People will be more trusting of the idea that they could get their program evaluated, and that we don't start from some ideological premise which says that, I'm going to always find that the programs of this kind are always bad, or this government's programs are always bad. I think we try to achieve a certain reputation for being A, competent, and B, neutral in terms of what the outcome is. We don't so much care about the outcome, we care about doing a good job of testing it.
You're running close to 1,000 RCTs,
Yes.
running and have run.
Yes.
How many of them are in India? And do you see this significantly expanding in India?
Yeah, I think a couple of hundred.
Couple of hundred.
Yeah.
So around 1/5 of it.
Yeah. Maybe more.
As is always the case in economics, your methods have also been criticized. I mean, I'll quote from a 2018 statement which many economists, including 3 Nobel laureates, issued. And they say about RCTs, but truly random sampling with blinded subjects is almost impossible in human communities without creating scenarios so abstract as to tell us little about the real world. And that statement also talks about the fact that such an approach tends to ignore the, and I quote, broader macroeconomic, political and institutional drivers of impoverishment and underdevelopment. How do you respond to such criticisms?
There are 2 separate criticisms. One, the one about blinded or not. I think we worry about that. We try lots of things. For example, I'll give you an example. We wanted to look at the effect of an MTV show. It's called Shuga in Nigeria. It had a very large impact on HIV, basically, and we don't quite see HIV, but we see a lot of, measures of safe sex. And we were interested in encouraging that by watching this MTV show. We worried that it's not blind, meaning it's not, people know that they're watching a show. They can't, so what we tried to do was to make it more comparable. We gave the control group also got to watch a show. It was just not a show that focused on HIV. And that's a way to get closer to a double blind. It's not perfect, but it's not that we are unaware of the problem. The problem of the fact that there are other things that are important in the world, who's arguing against it? I fully acknowledge that, lots of things happen that have nothing to do, which I couldn't test in our city, which either work or don't work, and some disasters happen because, we are unlucky, and some very fortunate things happen because we just happen to be in the right place, and that's the nature of life. It's not, I don't feel that we have ever claimed that we're going to we're going to explain every piece of development through the RCT. What we claim is a lot of what happens in development, we have very little control over. Where we have control, let's try to do a better job.
That's right. And the next question sort of builds upon that. When you were speaking in MIT after you got the award, you said that this award is not just for the 3 of you, but for the entire movement. In India, some very important anti-poverty programs, such as the MGNRGA, the Forest Rights Act, which gives tribals property rights about forest resources, movements have fought a lot to sort of get these programs. How do you see your movement, for more experiments in economics, and these people's movements to fight for better welfare programs, more welfare programs, sort of interacting in the future, both in India and outside?
Question. I'd never thought of that particular question. So I feel like one of the downsides of many social movements is they get frozen into a particular demand, this or nothing. And one of the ways in which we have tried to educate ourselves is to think about, let's see where we are, and let's think of where we can go from here. Now, those are different points of view, because at some level, there is some power to just I'm going to go for this, now I don't care about the evidence, I'm going for this. There is some power to that, because it doesn't require you to keep re-examining. But there's some danger to that, which is that you end up often painting yourself into a corner. You end up with gaining something that you may not actually really want. And I think there's an interesting tension there. I think I have never thought of this question, so I thank you for it. I'll think about it more. But I think it's an interesting tension where I think on both sides, the flexibility that we suggest, which is be experimental, try something. If it's not working, well, try something else. It has clearly some gains and some potential losses.
Let's come to the Indian economy now. Once again, speaking at MIT, you said to a Bengali reporter who asked this question that adhering to fiscal deficits and inflation targets is not going to help in fighting the current slowdown in the Indian economy. Can you elaborate a bit more on that?
I think this is not rocket science. It depends very much on the diagnosis of what's exactly happening in the Indian economy. I fear a little bit that we are in a Keynesian downturn, if I'm right.
Which you mean is the demand turn down?
Demand turn down, which feeds on itself. Yeah. I don't buy, I don't have money, so I don't buy because the biscuits and the biscuit company shut down, those people don't buy, and we get into this Keynesian tailspin. If we are there, then I think a short-term action of pumping demand into the hands of those who will spend is the easiest way to restore an economy. This is what the Obama administration did in the US. It was not as Bob Lucas, who's famously against Keynesian policy, said, well, when you are in the foxhole, we are all Keynesians. And I think I think it's not a controversial view. I think the question, what's controversial is how much of a demand slowdown are we facing. If we are facing a serious enough demand slowdown, I think even people who are against Keynesian views will become much more Keynesian, and that was Sir Lucas' example.
So what you mean is, given the fact that we are in a demand-driven slowdown, there is merit in letting go of both the inflation targets and the fiscal targets.
Correct, but I'm not saying that everybody agrees that we are in demand slowdown, yeah. And I'm willing to, given that the data isn't wonderful, you could disagree without. I don't think without prejudice. I don't think that people who are disagreeing are necessarily malafide or something. I just mean my hunch is that it's a demand slowdown.
You have a very interesting statement in your book about the Indian economy, and you say, one very real danger is that in trying to hold on to fast growth, India will veer towards policies that hurt the poor now in the name of future growth. Can you elaborate on this?
This is the experience of so many countries. I mean, you think of what happened in the UK and the US. Basically, after growth slowed down, they had no idea why it slowed down. But think of UK and the US in the mid-70s, growth suddenly slows down.
You have an entire chapter on that in your book.
Yeah, it never recovers. Okay? It stays slow. I mean, and it slows very quickly. After 73, it closes very quickly, and it never recovers. No, not to date. I mean, it's been up and down, but basically it goes down and stays down. So at that point, the first reaction was our policy frame, where there was a lot of relatively high taxation, lots of redistribution. This must be all wrong. We're going to fix this growth problem by massively cutting taxes and somewhat cutting redistribution. And if you cut taxes, you have to cut redistribution. In some sense, the fisc in the end stops it. And that was Reaganomics, that was Thatcher's economics.
You think we are heading towards that kind of an economics in India?
Because I'm just saying that's a natural interpretation of a lot of the slowdowns. That's what governments seem to fall into. And we are saying that we should be warned that did nothing for the US economy, it did nothing for the UK. We have no evidence that any of those policies, other than blowing up inequality, it's not clear they did anything. I think in some ways they created the economics that leads them to Trump and Brexit.
If you were to make the decisions, what are 2 or 3 things you would do immediately to sort of revive the Indian economy?
So if I were to make the decision, first thing I would do is I would spend a lot more time studying the demand. And I think, I'm not neither a macroeconomist by credential nor really nor have spent much time doing this, so my hunch is a hunch. And I want to say that, so I would have spent a long time trying to convince myself that there is a real demand shortage, and I collecting a bunch of data, etc.
In your MIT conference, you said you have to give money in the hands of poor people.
Right. So I'm saying conditional. You ask me, if I were a policymaker, what would I do? I would first collect a lot of data to make sure that it's a demand slowdown. If it's a demand slowdown, I would give money in the hands of poor people. That absolutely I believe. That's what the Obama administration basically does. Prints money and gives it. This is called quantitative easing, because they didn't want to call it printing money, but that was what they did. It's not unheard of.
In your book, you also talk about how fighting corruption is not a costless endeavor. Now, in India, especially in the last few years, anti-corruption has driven a lot of our politics and policy. We had, cancellation of licenses, etc. in the previous government. This government did something like demonetization, primarily to fight corruption. Do you think these policies have got to do with the current slowdown of the situation Indian economy is in?
So that's an interesting question. I think that there is a sense in which at least whether it's anti-corruption or just, the fear of being seen as corrupt, or actual, maybe corruption was important in kind of greasing the wheels, and it's been cut down. But I do feel, and lots of my business friends tell me, that decision making is slow now. They feel that there is a set of institutions, but the institutions don't seem to have they seem to be reluctant to commit themselves.
This fear of being victimized.
Fear of being considered, why did you do that? And I think you have to reassure. I think forbearance is crucial to getting people to. It's at the heart of market economy, is a certain forbearance. You have to sort of tell people that, look, you are innocent until proved guilty, and let's look for good proof. And I think the sense that if there is a mistake that's malfeasance, that's a mistake. I think you have to assure people that mistakes are not malfeasance.
Mistakes are not malfeasance.
Yes.
Let's move to larger issues. In your book, you talk about the increased research and development expenditure focus on things such as machine learning, big data methods. You say they are a distraction from truly path-breaking innovations. Are you also making a larger case that private sector dominance in R&D might not lead to socially optimal outcomes?
I think
because you also say that for companies it might seem beneficial, whereas for the society and the larger economy it isn't.
I'm completely saying that there is a pretty good case to be made that the private incentives are not the social incentives. And that's, I think, basically we don't like people being unemployed. The private companies don't care whether people are unemployed or not. So their job is, if I can replace X by a machine and it's cheaper, that's fine, but X is now an unemployed person. Society effectively pays somehow for him to survive. So it's your classic externality. I impose a cost on society which I don't bear. I feel that when you are replacing people, the Korean government is the first one that's actually gone systematically down this path of saying if you replace people, you will bear some of the cost.
There's a tax on robots.
Yes, yeah. And that's a way to basically make you internalize the cost of if a person is thrown out. That's a liability of the government, but it should be your liability because you made the choice. So you should internalize the social cost of that. So I think that the fact that the social cost is not the same as the social benefit is not the same as the private benefit, I think is true.
This also opens up a larger question because we live in a private economy, a globalized economy, and this is something which your book doesn't talk about. Given the fact that it is not just the Indian economy which is facing a slowdown, somewhere the entire world is facing this problem. Do you think there still are possibilities of some sort of an international cooperation to sort of revive the global economy as a whole? We live in the times of trade wars, etc. And history tells us that the Great Depression, when it happened, international cooperation had completely collapsed.
That's a reason why there should be cooperation. I think people should be scared. I think the history suggests that people should be very scared of this moment. I despair that the Chinese won't be able to persuade Mr. Trump of that, because he doesn't trust them. But I do feel that the global, we are all kind of victims of that, because, if the US makes China shrink, then we'll all pay for that. We're all going to be, because China is also a very large consumer of commodities, and anybody sells commodity. India actually less so, but like a lot of poor countries will pay for it.
And you see things headed in that direction as well.
I'm worried that the things are headed in that direction.
This book actually also talks a lot about politics, not just economics. Now, you argue in your book that expression of contempt for those who express racist sentiments or vote for such leaders, in talking about the Americans' politics probably, serves to only reinforce this sentiment. You say Hillary Clinton called people who voted for Trump deplorable, and they voted for Trump even more.
Absolutely.
Do you think this statement is relevant in the context of India also, given the kind of polarization we are facing?
Absolutely.
Would you like to talk?
I've always argued that we need to be to understand people's reasons for voting for even polarizing leaders. I think if you take the view that you do it, therefore you're a bad person, I think you undermine all possible ways, mechanism for democratic discussion and resolution. I think we have to give them credit, and it's not just a strategic move. It's my belief that lots of people, good people, get pushed down certain political alleys by forces they don't either understand or which manipulate them, and therefore we should not take a kind of a moral stand against them. Because you voted for X and therefore you must be bad is exactly the wrong thing to do, both morally and practically. And we kind of make the case in the book that the reason why people often have political preference of a particular kind don't necessarily come out of some incredibly deep hatred of some ethnicity, but often a way to understand a confusing world, and that's therefore a reason to try to mediate and make it easier to comprehend the world than to throw contempt at them.
So if I were to put words in your mouth, you're essentially saying that democracy hasn't let down liberal values, liberals have let down democracy.
Correct. Absolutely. That's a beautiful way to say it, but I've always taken that view that, in a sense, we in India, we have not created a deep enough liberalism. As liberals in India, I think we have not created a deep enough liberalism, and we should stick to our liberalism and not lose the tolerance that's built into the liberalism.
Your book says, and I quote, many economists have a philosophical objection to manipulating preferences. We just celebrated 150 years of Mahatma Gandhi. And Mahatma Gandhi is somebody who most mainstream economists despise because he sought to do exactly that, shape preferences. You wear khadi, you do this, Gram Swaraj. Do you think Mahatma Gandhi is relevant in the global fight against poverty today?
Absolutely. And I don't think they're contemptuous, by the way. I think they don't know very much, but I think a particular generation of economists might have been anti-Gandhi, but I think in today's world, it's hard to stand in today's world and not appreciate his extraordinary commitment to not label people, try to be inclusive of people who were despising of him. I think that was an extraordinarily powerful commitment which I totally admire. I think that's related to what we were talking about a minute ago, which is that I think he was deeply committed to being, to not, he sometimes got angry. And with someone like him, you have the whole record of his getting angry because he wrote every day. But once you see what happens, after a while his anger goes away and he tries again to reach out to those same people. And I think he was remarkably deeply liberal in some important way, which changing preferences or not, I think there was a liberalism which came from saying that in the end everybody has good in them. And that liberalism is the deep liberalism that I think that's the legacy of Gandhi to me.
Well, Professor Banerjee, now that you've got the Nobel Prize, your following will not just remain within economists, but especially in India, will become a very big public intellectual. What is the message you'd like to convey to young people, especially people who are pursuing their academic careers in India?
I think love what you do. I think I benefited from having parents who were very tolerant of whatever I wanted to do. I think it's really great to love what you do. I think it's I talked to a bunch of people who went into, I'm going to say finance, but I'm not particularly prejudiced against just finance, but it's and say that we are now a bit bored with what we do. I made a lot of money, but I'm bored. I really feel that many of those people would have been better off, doing what they enjoyed. I think do what you really. Passion is extraordinarily handy thing to have for life because it keeps you going. I'm 58. I'm still passionate about what I do. I enjoy it every day. I wake up in the morning and I want to do more work, and that's a huge reward. I have no incentive to want to. I mean, maybe with the Nobel Prize I could check out and become a guru, but I want to just keep doing the research I do.
Do you think we in India have been able to provide this kind of an ecosystem where people, students, academics can pursue their passions?
I think less so than I was growing up. I feel that when I was growing up, I went to college, and when I went to JNU, I think there were people who had quite different political views actually across quite a wide spectrum, but they were all extremely talented people and extremely passionate about what they did, and that's sort of what makes me want to be an academic. I think one of the things we need to most take seriously is if we don't get really talented teachers, we are going to not get people interested in doing exciting academic things. I think one of the things we have, I think partly because the industry has become so much more lucrative, etc. We don't attract the same kind of people into academia, really super talented people, I think. And I think that's a pity. I think if we had exciting teachers, we would have excited students.
We also now have a public-private contradiction in India. There are very good private universities which are coming up, but they charge fees which more than 95% of Indians just can't afford.
Yeah.
Last question. Two things which you think of and you're extremely optimistic about India, say in the next 20, 30 years, and two things which you think of and you lose all hope.
I think two things I think of is, I think there's still a deep optimism here, a sense that the future will be better, the future will be Indian, and I think that optimism is cheering. And the thing that I've always enjoyed and valued, which is an extraordinary sense of warmth. We're here, people are so effortlessly warm.
Even among the poor.
Even absolutely among the poor. But there's a sense of warmth which is, very effortless here in a sense, in which you won't find it in many other places in the world I've been. It's just the warmth is immediate. You feel it immediately, That, on the other side, I worry that first that I think I feel like there's a whole generation of people who have been, I think, shortchanged by the education they've got. That's a big worry to me, because at some point they have a right to be angry, and I feel that they might be angry. that they might be fine that, you know, they invested in education. They were the first generation of people who really went to the college. After their parents had nobody in the family had been to college, but they didn't realize that the college education wasn't worth that much, because we really have created a kind of a large tier of not very high quality education. That's something that I think is a...
So their expectations have crashed.
Their expectations have gone up and might crash, and when they crash, they will be angry, and that to me is a major concern for, you know, as a social problem. And the second one is, you know, I think we need to be more tolerant of dissent. I think dissent is whatever. I think it's what it's a part of our tradition in a sense. You know, in my family there were people who were you know, Hindus from every, you know, Vaishnavas, Shaivas, Shaktas, like everybody was from different sects, and there was no particular homogeneity. And I think that was and they didn't particularly need to homogenize each other. I think it's a deep tradition we have. We should embrace it.
Thank you very much, Professor
Thank you
for talking to us, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you.